It's time to join Montana's very own and your voice for agriculture, Talkin' Ag Lane Nordlund, for today's Lanecast.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here on the Lanecast Ag Podcast and joining the agriculture conversation today. Weather, it's on the minds of farmers and ranchers across the region, the nation, and of course it's an important part of our daily lives and operations. So join us here today as Meteorologist Brian Bledsoe. We're here in Miles City, Montana at the mid-year meeting of the Montana Stock Growers Association. And Brian, you're wrapping up the convention here in just a little bit. So, I mean, that's a big task. You're the keynote here at the end of the day.
I'm excited about this for several. It's always good to be with you, Lane, and get to chat with you. We always get up to Montana. But driving over from Billings to Miles City yesterday, it's green out here. So, you guys have had some fantastic moisture, and that obviously puts everybody in a good mood for a conference like this today.
Well, and as we look at the weather, obviously producers have been blessed with quite a lot of moisture across parts of the Western United States in particular. And as we look at that forecast, a lot of the news over the past week has been that change from La Nina to El Nino. Am I correct in that one? Or it's the other way around?
Other way around.
See, This is why I'm not a meteorologist.
That's okay. You can lob those questions to me.
This is why I BS as a broke farm broadcaster to pay for my cows. But so when we look at this, producers obviously they're making a lot of decisions right now, whether it's on the livestock end or on the crop end of things. Folks are trying to get a crop in between rainstorms in parts of the nation. We're also seeing a lot of drought in the southern hemisphere, in Mexico, impacting corn production. And then also so many livestock producers know, well, how long can we be out on grass? We've got a lot of grass right now, but what's it going to be like in the fall? So I think that'll be a great preview of what's in store today. But overall, what has it been like here this spring as you've been watching these weather patterns?
It's been fantastic. And when I was at the end of the year meeting, with stock growers in December, it was there was a lot of trepidation about what the winter was going to be like, and for the most part, we knew the winter was going to be pretty tame. We didn't get a lot of cold air that came down, and then we would finally start getting some moisture in the spring, and that has really worked out fairly well. The one issue that I have, and we're never very far away from drought in the plains, so. That's kind of where I'm worried going forward. And I think, you're talking about planting windows, you're worried about how long this is going to continue. I think we're going to be seeing very clearly that this pattern is going to shut off for a little while. And to the point, you mentioned the southern hemisphere in Mexico. They've been under the influence of just a tremendous ridge of high pressure down there that has been fueling drought. I've talked to several ranch managers, Southwest Texas, that do manage some ranches down in Mexico. And there are some places down there for the past couple of years, and I was talking to one guy at his headquarters, and he said, we haven't had greater than a quarter inch of rain at the headquarters in 2 years. So there's, the forage is nothing, obviously, and it's been hot, and it was hot during this spring. That ridge of high pressure, when it's that strong under this pattern, essentially leaves an artifact in the atmosphere that kind of will expand and contract and whatnot. That northern part of that is going to flex on the southwest and the western part of the United States here in the next couple of weeks, and the northern edge of that is going to have an influence up here in Montana. So, last week it snowed in North Dakota, and we really haven't hit a lot of warm stretches at all, and I think we are fixing to turn this on a dime where we've had this kind of wet, cooler spring. We're going to get about a heat and dryness coming here shortly.
So when we look at El Nino and La Nina, I know you and I have talked about this before on other podcasts that we're affiliated with. Obviously, people, they follow this, but they sometimes maybe go by the definition a little too much, and maybe they don't know there's a little flexibility in how we're looking at this, how we're forecasting the situation. So do you want to quickly just walk us through, because obviously I screwed it up already, which season we're coming in and out of. But.
Well, if we want to take that down and look at it graphically, when you have an El Nino, you have warmer than average water off the west coast of South America and across the equator. And what that does is that puts low pressure here in the eastern side of that region. So you have rising motion, you have a southern branch of the jet stream that kicks in, and usually an El Nino will favor the southern tier of the United States with the better moisture. I say that's usually because every El Nino and La Nina are different. The problem is that when you look at the bigger picture and you try to average out all of these different intricacies with what they produce, you get an average, but that average doesn't always hit. You know, southern New Mexico, southern Arizona, southwest Texas, they're in drought right now. They did not get any benefits from that El Nino that we dealt with last year. Conversely, when you flip the pattern, you go to cooler than average water in that same region, and you replace the low pressure that was fueling the southern branch of the jet stream with high pressure. That sinking air squashes that southern branch, and then your storm track ends up and goes north. So right now, when I'm talking to, you know, whether it be farmers or ranchers in West Texas or Montana, I say we're in that transition period right now where neither one is really governing us, but we are steaming toward a La Nina at this point with that cooler than average water. And in many cases, that will shut off the water in the southern part of the United States, which you look at the amount of water they've had across, you know, a large part of Oklahoma, Texas, the Gulf Coast, but we forget that Gulf Coast region, and I know we were talking a little bit about in terms of cotton production down there, they were terribly dry last summer and hot down there. So this has been a blessing for them to cure it, but it's not a cure-all for everybody. And when we're transitioning, that's my worry going forward, is that this La Nina is we're going to see drought expansion take place.
So obviously, for our producers out in the countryside, from Montana all the way down through New Mexico, what are we going to be mainly seeing? And I'm thinking Kansas and Colorado too, with those wheat crops. And Kansas, of course, they just had their wheat tour. Things pretty on par with their wheat tour and USDA estimates, but still not the greatest conditions for the nation's top winter wheat producing state.
No, and we've seen the prices. You know, I think wheat's at $7. You know, at least it was last time I checked a few days ago. So, you know, and then we have the Russian problems that are going on there with their crops. So it's pushing prices. So it's one of those things that if you've got a good wheat crop, boy, you are going to be doing some serious business this year. The problem is that there are a lot of holes. There's an area of west central and southwest Kansas that did not get much moisture at all. They've been starting to see some rains come through. We've had some hail issues, and we are going to have more hail issues go on. You know, late May and early June, that is the wheelhouse for that. But the graphic that I'm showing here this is a 45-day forecast from the European model, and we call this the weeklies because it projects out a month and a half or so, and it has certain biases. So I don't want to say you look at this graphic and say this is exactly what it's going to be. But I've been looking at this. I look at it every day, and the trend has been perpetual here. It has been continuing to paint these drier than average conditions across not only, you know, you can see what Montana looks like here, and we still have some drought issues in the west and southwest part of the state, and down across Colorado, and obviously into western parts of Kansas. So for a lot of the producers that I do individual work for, I sent an email out a couple of weeks ago that specifically said the 28th through the 5th, we got to shove a lot of water in the ground because the heat's coming, number one, and the dryness is coming as well. So you've got guys that are, you know, are we going to have enough grass? Are we going to get this wheat to the finish line or whatever? But I think the bigger picture is let's broaden things out a little bit and see how this summer's going to look. And I am really concerned about this graphic because when you look at it, there's a lot of dryness in the western United States. And when you look at this graphic, there's also going to be a lot of heat. So we're looking at anomalies here, and a large part of the West is going to be anywhere from 3 to 6 degrees, you know, Fahrenheit above average for the next month and a half.
So what is maybe your forecast for maybe when we go more into La Nina, as we're kind of in that neutral pattern right now? What can we expect that after that 45-day outlook to be, or what could the expected trends really look like?
Of course. So if you look at sea surface temperature anomalies, this is the way they're stacked right now. So we have several different things, and if you look here in the northeast Pacific, and if you look between the Baja and Hawaii, we've got cooler than average water there. If you look at the Atlantic Ocean, you've got warmer than average water, and then down here off the west coast of South America, you see that blue stripe. Well, that's where we've got this budding La Nina taking place. All right. So if we look at where we are going in terms of analogs, okay? So what years from the past match up pretty closely with what's going on right now? I look at what happened in 2020. And 2020 right now, if I had to pin a year that looks pretty similar to what we have going on, because I've got the ocean temperatures over here currently on the right and the ones from 2020, same day, you see some similarities that are going on right there. And if we look back at what happened in June of 2020, those are the precipitation anomalies that happen. And you see we dried things out in the midsection. We still had some moisture going on up here across western Montana, Idaho, and the Pacific Northwest. The problem here is that I don't think this is exactly how this is going to play out. And that's the problem with analoging, okay? So the bigger issue is what happens June to August in 2020. You see we really dried things out west and southwest. What happens when we went to September to November? That dryness just expanded. All right, so that's the one thing that I'm concerned about with the La Nina. For one reason, and one reason alone, during 2020, there was no southwest monsoon. So you say, well, that's down in Arizona, New Mexico. Well, if they shut their water down there, it has a regional impact on areas farther north and northeast. The one thing that I am encouraged about Lane, though, is that when historically, because we look at these averages of El Nino and La Nina, historically speaking, El Nino does not benefit Montana. La Nina does. So I was even talking with Turk Stovall just a little while ago because he was asking me about that. And I'm worried about Montana having a little more of a winter this winter than what we had last winter, which doesn't take a whole lot, obviously, because it was so mild. So that's something that I think we need to plan for going forward with the La Nina.
But hopefully with that, of course, too, there's a lot of grass out there right now,
Yep.
so we can at least get a hay crop put up to really prepare for what could be a pretty nasty winter.
Exactly, and even in giving advice to folks in the Southern Plains, I'm like, look, there's a lot of cheap hay out there right now, but you start talking about drought, those hay prices are gonna start to skyrocket. So, and even I do, personal advisement for my own family. I'm like, look, I'd buy some cheap hay.
There's a lot of it out there.
There's a lot of it out there right now, and it doesn't take very long for it to change. So, obviously, when these longer range patterns, we always talk about La Nina and El Nino and what they can mean. I just don't necessarily like it when somebody puts all their eggs in one basket, because clearly last year's a great example, where the areas that should have been benefited from El Nino didn't, and that's where they're having real problems with dryness and drought right now.
Well, again, I think that's probably the most important thing that we're going to cover today, is getting hay bought up for our livestock producers out there. But friends, we're going to be back with Brian Bledsoe right here on the Landcast Ag Podcast. But first, these words from our friends at the NCBA.
When it comes to the beef business, there's no room for gray area. The decisions being made in Washington affect the future of the beef industry, the livelihood of your fellow farmers and ranchers. Your National Cattlemen's Beef Association knows there's what benefits cattlemen and there's what doesn't. Visit ncba.org to learn more.
Returning back to the agriculture conversation on the Landcast Ag Podcast, broadcasting from the Eastern Montana Fairgrounds. No, it's not Buck and Horse Sale weekend, that's behind us, but it is the mid-year meeting of the Montana Stock Growers Association, and meteorologist Brian Bledsoe joins us out of Colorado Springs, Colorado, but up here helping educate farm broadcasters like myself on the difference between El Nino and La Nina.
You got that down right now, Lane?
No.
Okay.
I'm not even going to. Maybe next time we'll have a green screen set up for you.
We can do that. Yeah, we can do that.
So, we were talking about, before the break, that folks maybe should look at getting some corn bought up. Hay bought up, but corn comes to mind too. We mentioned Mexico is importing 47% more corn for feed than they were last year. The drought is so severe down there. And I also look at the politics that is coming into play with corn in Mexico, because they have banned GMO crops for all. Well, then they amended that to, just human consumption. So it's just interesting to watch how politics are coming into play when it comes to food production and imports versus exports. But when we're looking at the U.S. corn crop, what can maybe our feeders or our guys that are looking to buy some corn, what is your thoughts on that weather-wise?
Well, there's always some trepidation this time of year for a couple of reasons. One, are they, because of how much rain they've had back there, eastern Nebraska, Iowa, are they going to be able to get the crop in? Well, they're going to get the crop in. We talk about this. So you move past that first hurdle, and you can see that play out in the markets too. Then your next question is, well, are we going to get enough growing degree days and heating units to finish it? And are we going to be able to do that and still be able to navigate not having drought? So that's a hurdle. But the other thing that I think a lot of people need to wrap their mind around is there is so much water in the ground back there right now, and it takes a long time to bake that out, heat up the atmosphere, and go completely dry. So when you look at what a lot of the longer range models are looking at it, we can look at some of this, and this one was the Euro model, and this is the forecast for June. And for June, you see a couple of things here. You see drying out in the west, and you see the Corn Belt and the midsection of the country still staying wetter than average during that time. So it's kind of one of those things, you know, if the pattern's wet, it feeds the wet. If it's dry, it feeds the dry. And if you look at what happens beyond June, and if we go to July, you see a very similar pattern. We're drying out in the west still, and then we're still running moisture up the midsection of the country. And it may not be all 3 I-states that are wetter than average during that time, but history has taught us if it's raining in Iowa, you're probably going to be okay in the grand scheme of things.
Well, luckily up along
we'll go
Russell
back there.
Minnett's and I's family up
Yeah.
on the High Line of Montana, they're getting a little bit of moisture.
They're getting a
up
little
there.
bit of water up there at that point. The big deal that I have serious reservations about, you see northern parts of Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, right up to the Four Corner states. That corridor is dry because the monsoon is very anemic. You've got big stuff going down here across parts of Texas and the Gulf Coast. I think the hurricane season is going to be terribly active for those areas. And if you look at August, it's a very similar setup. You see southeast Texas right up to the midsection of the country. And again, we're talking a computer model here. There are some changes that are obviously going to take place, but when you look at these trends, a lot of times they can project forward in a fairly accurate fashion. Not the individual details of it, but you see a theme here where we don't have terrible dryness and drought coming up here across the Corn Belt. Is it going to be drier than it has been? Listen, it doesn't take a whole lot to be drier than it has been up there. And I think there's a lot of people actually even clamoring for some dryness that's going to take place up there. If we go to another model and look at the NMME for June, you see a similar take here. No massive dryness. We're still wet through this corridor. Even Montana still may be catching some moisture. The problem is you see the dryness coming out of Mexico there for June. If we go to July, it continues to creep northward right up to the... And I think this is, as I said before, I'm worried about the ridge that's been dominating Mexico shifting and coming northward across the western United States. And if you go one more into August, you see that dryness continues there. And a little bit of dryness there coming across the Corn Belt. But again, there's so much water there. I was talking to a guy up around Hardington, Nebraska, in the northeast corner of the state, and he said, look, I've got enough water in the ground right now that it's going to make my crop. And he's talking about 300 bushel corn. So am I worried about the Corn Belt at this point? I'm just not.
Yep.
I think there's going to be a huge corn crop based on everything that's going on right now.
And hopefully that bleeds into the next year a little bit too, if we do have some of the concerns moving into 2025's growing season.
Exactly, and I think those will be some of the similar concerns farther south. You know, the hard La Nina rarely benefits the winter wheat belt across Kansas and farther southward. So if areas north continue to get the moisture and areas south dry out, then that's kind of how you're looking at it is from a La Nina standpoint when we go through fall and even into winter.
So as our producers on the livestock end get ready to market calves here on the video or look to where if they're going to send some down feedlot country, really not too much of a concern of having a lack of grass across the western United States, and probably no risk of having to ship early unless there's some natural disasters, fires, grasshoppers.
Right.
You're going to hear that from producers in eastern Montana.
Yep.
But overall, hopefully we do have some grass here, and people can just market calves on time this year.
Well, and I like I said, I see a lot of grass out here right now, and a lot of grass that cattle can immediately go to. The one thing that I'm cautious about going forward is, and I'm telling producers, I'm like, just be ready for the pivot, because this weather pattern is going to change, and you are going to see it change pretty quickly here during the next couple of weeks or so. And we even had good storms and some rains yesterday, across Montana. So the pattern is still staying active. The one thing that we don't want to have happen is for us to get locked into a weather regime and then not see any variability in that pattern. And for some parts of the West, especially the farther south you go, in my backyard, I'm especially concerned about this summer for Colorado, because I think the dryness and the heat is really going to flex on areas farther south. So I want to caution, just be ready for that. I know we're always looking over our shoulder, we have to, but just be ready for that.
My last area, we mentioned the Black Sea region. For several years, everyone keeps talking geopolitical issues over there. That's going to help our wheat prices. It hasn't. They've been pumping a lot of wheat. Russia dominating the world market. Ukraine still able to get some of their wheat exports out. But that weather in the Black Sea region, what are your thoughts on that going through the rest of this growing season and harvest?
I think in terms of what we need to be even more concerned about the weather is from the political standpoint going forward and what's going to happen. I mean, we have presidential election coming up. I know that there's a lot of trepidation from producers, marketers, and whatnot alike, and even within the simple economy. So in terms of a weather standpoint, I'm not hugely concerned about that kind of thing. And you even saw market prices bump up here in the United States because of what's going on over there. So I think if you're looking market, watch the politics more than the weather, and I think that's what you're going to be looking for.
Well, again, Brian Bledsoe, thank you for joining us. I know we got a busy day here to wrap up convention.
It's a fun day.
But it is.
Yeah.
And but it's fun to watch this, and our attendees here are going to get more in-depth presentation as well. But maybe let's give a shout out for how folks can learn more about you, or if you're a Montana Stock Growers member, you get an email blast every time weather's coming up, doing a forecast there. So
that's right. So as a stock grower member, every month I will put out a long-range forecast video that producers can readily access. And I think the thing that I try to target is that this is what's going to happen not only in the short term, but let's broaden things out in the long term. And this information I look at every single day, Lane. And someone might say, well, how does this change? There's always little things that you pick up along the way, and always more information that you're putting in. So, I think that's probably one of the best ways across the board that if you're interested in this type of information, become a member, and we'll hook you up.
All right. Brian, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you, Lane. It's always a pleasure.
Appreciate you taking time. And of course, friends, a lot of information, things to pay attention as we make our way through 2024 and just try to make a go of it out in the countryside. Again, thank you to Brian Bledsoe for joining us here today. Check him out online, or join groups like the Montana Stock Growers, where you can get those personalized weather updates. And for more on the Lanecast Ag Podcast and the Western Ag Network, make sure and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen or watch your podcasts as well. With that, friends, that will do it for today's agriculture conversation on the Lanecast Ag Podcast. Catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lanecast with Talkin' Ag, Lane Nordlund. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lanecast on your Apple or Android devices. We look forward to joining you next time on the Lanecast.